You are about to enjoy a Firearms Radio Network podcast. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows. If you like what we're doing and would like to help support the show, visit patreon.com/afteractionproject. If you'd like to throw us some free support and appreciation, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review on iTunes. And then tonight's episode, just like every episode, is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network. Be sure to check out the other great podcasts on the Firearms Radio Network by visiting firearms-related.net. And our other show sponsor is the RangeBuddy.App. If you haven't checked that out, we added a few extra drills to that. So now we're over 140 handgun drills on there, all sorted by required target type and filterable by the skills that you want to work. There's a virtual instructor component on there that's pretty awesome. And then the newest update as of a few days ago added a dry fire training tool and tracker. There's a shooter's metronome on there. So you set the split times or the transition times that you want to be working on, and it will give you that audible tick at the corresponding intervals. So you don't have to worry about beats per minute or anything like that if you're using a traditional metronome for your dry fire practice. But let's get into it. Let's talk about what you all are here for, and that is episode 87. Tonight we are joined by Gabe White, and we'll be discussing his Pistol Shooting Solutions course. Before we get into that, Gabe, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about your background in the firearms training industry, and then we'll get into the course.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me here tonight. My name is Gabe White. My general background. Excuse me, bad time to have to clear my throat. Excuse me. My general background is I'm not a police officer and I'm not a soldier. I'm just a private citizen. And from the time I've been a little kid, I've always been interested in the martial arts and self-defense. And I've always been studying something, whatever that was at the time, in the last, my adult life since I could own handguns. So about 25 years or so, it's been defensive firearms skills and tactics, especially with the handgun. So that's kind of my background and outlook, and I would definitely categorize the defensive use of the handgun as one of the many martial arts, and I look at it and kind of address it that way. So that's kind of my general background.
Perfect. And then for our viewers out there, you might recognize that in Andy's place we have Chris Bean on to help co-host this episode. So Chris, do us a quick favor, reintroduce yourself to our listeners, and then we'll kick it over to Annette.
Sure. My name's Christopher Bean. I run a small company in Georgia right now called Tactical Advantage. Also part of staff for Active Self-Protection. So kind of a training junkie myself, but no one can fill in for Andy. I'm just keeping the seat warm, I guess.
Well, it's much appreciated because if anybody's seen an episode where it's just me up here solo, it's not as good as when I have some help. So definitely looking forward to the insight that you bring to tonight's episode. Speaking of training junkies, Annette, talk to us a little bit about your training specifically with Gabe. I know the last time that we had you on here in the after show and the before show, you had told us that you were getting ready to take Gabe's class for the umpteenth time or something or another. The third
Only
time.
The third.
Awesome.
As accused, I am a training junkie. My name is Annette Evans. For those of you who aren't familiar, I am on herown.life, and where I talk about lots of things, self-defense and everything else. But my nerd passion is technical shooting skills. So I have acquired a lot of training over the last mumbledy years, and I just took Gabe's class for the third time last September, and I am continuing to chase the turbo. One of these days, I'm going to catch it.
I think you are too. The timing just needs to be right. It's like one of these things of it's you got to do so much sharpening for that it's such an enthusiast thing. You just need that to coincide with when you're doing the class.
Yep.
And then it'll happen at that point. That's what I think.
there's a lot of talk about chasing those pins, and I want to spend a little bit of time in tonight's episode about that. Before we do that, Gabe, talk to us a little bit about the pistol shooting solutions course. I know that's the main course or the only course that you teach. But how is it 2 day? It's a 2 day course, 1 day course. I know it's 1,000 rounds, but talk to us a little bit about that course specifically.
Sure. So that's my national class that I have the incredibly great fortune to fly around the country and teach nationally. I do a lot of other training also, but it's generally at the regional level. So that's the kind of foundational training that, I don't know, I may not be correct on this point, but it feels to me like there is some great foundational training available in like every region of the country now, and probably by a number of different parties. And so that's also what I do. I do a lot more training than just the dozen or so pistol shooting solution classes that I teach nationally. But those are kind of like the, pinnacle thing, because everywhere that I go, it kind of gets a real strong core group of enthusiast shooters together. Is a hub for those people. I'm sure there are many of them, but it definitely functions that way. And it's really neat to have, there's this thing that you love, and then, you go somewhere and all these other people want to come and love it with you too. And it's a very, very happy kind of class that way. The class itself is intended as, the shortest way to say it is, it's high performance concealed carry. It's a technical and tactical enhancement package intended for a well-founded defensive handgun practitioner. So in my journey since the early, I guess I always have graduated to a new level of, now I'm serious, but, since I got serious with handgun training and, maybe like a little before 2010, maybe 2008 to 2010, as that happened, I had kind of this journey with, I think some elements in it that are not uncommon for enthusiasts that come from the tactical world. So anybody who is, kind of categorically similar to me, and I've pistol shooting solutions in many ways kind of mirrors the leaps up that I feel like I've taken as a tactical practitioner from availing myself of the technical wisdom of the competitive world, and trying to build up that side of the house, on my own. And I think there are some things that are pretty common to a tactical practitioner coming from the tactical world that is then trying to do that particular thing. There are kind of some things that are identifiable enhancements, and I try to bring those to people with the pistol shooting solutions class. And I kind of characterize it as an intermediate / advanced class. It has a lot of advanced stuff in it, and to my enormous gratification, there appears to be significant replay value to it, as as shown by repeat students. But it really is, you got all these kind of semi-arbitrary terms, but once you're kind of, to the intermediate level, you've got the basics and the foundation down at least competently. I think that there are some big leaps up that can be made, and that's what that class is kind of about. And without going into the, we're just doing technical skills, but continuing to maintain the defensive context and the context and the combative context that is completely central to it all to me. Like I can't the fact that I'm a private citizen, I can't go, well, I don't do tactics. I know a lot of people take that position, and probably not wholly wrongly so, but I cannot do it. So that's kind of what the class is about.
Although I think you undersell some of the tactical pieces that you do cover in class.
Thank you, because I mean, really, that's I am the biggest Timmy that I know. I mean, it really is about tactical stuff. It's just, shooting well kind of supports that.
And I think that's something you do really well, and I kind of agree with Annette that I think you're underselling it, because you put the performance application of shooting into context on when you would have to use that potentially in the real world together, probably better than anyone else I know, as experiencing the class myself.
Oh, many thanks, Chris. That's a high compliment.
As I've mentioned, I have used some of what I've learned in your class in classes that nobody would say are not tactical. I showed up at VCAST earlier this year and used some of what you had taught about, managing distance and using your shooting skills in order to solve the problem. And it was a pretty surgical solution. It worked really well.
That was great, and that was really, really neat for me to hear about that, because that was the second report that I've gotten of similar character where you're in another class that is very hugely a tactics oriented class, and you were able to put a tactic that we a fairly important one that we cover in pistol shooting solutions together to really good effect for yourself, and that is like super cool. That was really neat.
And Gabe mentioned leaps, right? The leaps up. What were some of the leaps up for yourself from that first time that you took that course to the third, or the most recent time that you've completed it?
It's only been 3 so far. I think the biggest thing for me has been really discovering versatility in shooting skills. Like, I came in kind of shooting a gun that I didn't have a lot of time on, and kind of battled through it, did pretty good actually. And then Gabe's class is really where I learned how much those skills transferred. So the first time I'm shooting a double action gun with a dot from concealment appendix. The second time I'm shooting a gamer irons gun from an open top holster. And it was really kind of amazing how similar that was. And there's a lot of, I would say the leap wasn't so much in technical skill as in faith in my ability of I could pick up that gun and run it. And it doesn't really matter. It's a double action gun. It's a striker gun. It's got irons. It's got dot, whatever.
Gabe, are you fine? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Annette.
I actually feel like if I had to get my gun out and do work with it, I'd be able to. Because if I can survive Gabe's class with that gun, then I'm going to be able to do what I need to do.
It is kind of a boatload of draw the gun and burn that one person down. It's like kind of a lot of that. There's a whole lot of that. Like that's the central theme. There's at least one. You got a gun. You got to use it. Get it out. Use it well. Like from A to B.
Kind of a really profound statement, though, like learning to put faith in your skill and not in the gear. That's a profound statement.
That's a fact.
And it's such a test in Gabe's class of your skill. Like there's not very many classes that you take. And Chris, I know you've experienced this, even if we haven't talked about it. You show up at a class and you're like, the shooting's not that hard. How many shooting classes have you been? You're like, this is an interesting class. I'm learning stuff, but the actual mechanical shooting, not super challenging once you get to a certain ability level. Gabe's class is just challenging regardless.
I mean, I think what you said is kind of the norm. I mean, and it's not all wrong either. It's kind of it's like deviation from that is something you do for certain reasons that can be valid, but it's kind of it's that way in part because it's reality and it's not all wrong. I mean, like there's room to deviate for that, but it's kind of like this specialty thing that if you're into it, cool. But if you're not, then you don't need to mess with it.
There's a lot of instructors out there that have kind of found the thing that they're known for. And I think one of the things that we've seen recently kind of catch mainstream attention is that like performance shooting instructors. And Gabe, I think you're in that world, but I feel like, speaking with other students of yours and reading after action reports is that one of the common themes is the technical shooting skills. How do you convey that, right? How do you, I guess, dial in to the technical level so it's not just grip the gun, press the line your sights up and press the trigger. So you actually go into technical detail when you're teaching your students.
Well, I mean, honestly, the last handful of things you said there, that kind of is the answer. Is the grip the gun, aim it, press the trigger, and that's like kind of is that, in huge part. I guess my answer to your question would probably be to steal the question or to borrow the question that you asked Annette of like, what were the big breakthroughs? Because that's a lot of like my big breakthroughs are what I try to give the people in pistol shooting solutions. I mean, that's a lot of what pistol shooting solutions is it's a 2-day condensation of my journey from, whatever it was, 20 years, 15, 18 years ago to now, in terms of building a lot of technical skill on top of a perfectly good tactical foundation. And one of the very, very biggest things, a couple of the very biggest things there's actually a number of them, but one of the very biggest things is to throw off the yoke of low expectations and to observe another person doing something at the highest identifiable level. Take that very directly as evidence that you can do that also if you practice sufficiently to do it. If you get the knowledge and then you practice in accordance with that and you sharpen up your knife, so to speak, to such a degree, then you can do that too. And that would be my starting point default assumption for any given thing. And largely in life, I'm sure we could find plenty where it's like, okay, it's not really going to work that way. But certainly for shooting is to throw off any belief that the other person, the person you're comparing yourself to, or the person you're idealizing, or the person you're using as your exemplar for your, the potential performance that you could have, is you get rid of two things. Is that you ignore any equipment variations as a source of why they're doing it better than you, whether there is truth to it or not. And sometimes there is, but you ignore it and just like set that aside. And then same thing with not letting yourself decide that they are fundamentally different than you, and there's certain language that's often associated with that, like they're an alien, they're a robot, they're a cyborg, it's like they're from another planet. It's some language that defines them as not a human, but you're just a human, and so why would you be able to do those same things? And that's like exactly the wrong conclusion. You should start with the opposite conclusion. Start with that other human being is it's terrible for like a number of reasons, but start with the conclusion that other human being being able to do something is evidence that you can probably learn to do the same thing, or alternatively to respect reality, because the simple fact is you may not actually be able to learn to do the same thing as them, but that as personal policy, you ignore that editorial conclusion and just identify the highest level of human performance, which they currently exemplify, drive as hard as you can toward it, and when you reach it, then extend further from there and exceed it. And that's hugely as a statement of personal policy, not as not a statement of what is the nature of physical reality. That's not what it's about. I would probably say some different things if that was the point, but it is not the point. The point is as a pragmatic personal philosophy to make yourself better. And in shooting, those two things are really huge. There's somebody who is they're like a superhuman performer according to the levels of performance that we currently own or have touched or can recognize, and then you just definition yourself out by saying they're an alien and I'm a human, so they can do it and I cannot. Not do that, and then not descend into the fact that they may have different or juicier equipment than us, which quite honestly, that gap has closed a lot. I mean, think of like any tactical class that you go to today. Those are some damn juiced up guns as far as like the overall student body goes. So those two things are like really, there's more, but those two things are like really, really, really huge.
Do you have a method or a strategy to kind of bring that out in your students in the class? Because when we're talking about levels of instructors and the performance leaps that students see after taking a 2-day course, I haven't taken your class, right? But from the feedback that I've heard, you're near the top of that, right? So you're doing something over 2 days. I know it's an intense 2 days of training, right? You might get 30-minute lunch break on each day, but it's go, go, go. How are you bringing that out and really getting students to start maximizing their performance?
Well, so I guess there's a few answers to that. It's a multi-part answer. So in one part of the answer is that I say the same thing I just said, but with more words. So there's kind of like more angles to convince. And then another angle is there's a very, very important mechanism behind this, which is that you should conceptually divorce accuracy from time. It is a normal and conventional way to think in shooting that in order to be faster, I will be less accurate, or in order to be more accurate, I will be slower. And those things do measure out in many instances from a practical standpoint. I mean, if you have me draw and shoot a target at 25 yards versus draw and shoot a target at 3 yards, you're going to be able to measure those differences. But it is same vein as the last thing, as a pragmatic personal philosophy that will garner you huge improvement. That's where you should divorce accuracy from time and conclude that, in order to do so, and I want to give credit to a certain person for this particular thing. I phrase it totally differently now, but Kyle Ferris, who went on by the internet name Flex Money, the GM out of Ohio, I have no idea where he's at or if he's even shooting USPSA anymore. It was only a person I knew from the internet back in the day, but he gave a basic example that was very, very powerful to me and profound, and was the first person to tell me this point, and I ran with it, and it served me extremely well. And that is that, so if you imagine a shooter's time and accuracy illustrated by the yin-yang symbol, because it's, two halves with equal amounts. Ignore the kernel of each other, ignore that part. It's just like, two wavy halves, right? But it's halves is the point. And so if you imagine that in a pie divided that way, and the normal way of thinking would be, if I'm going to be more accurate, then one of those things is going to take away from the other. It's going to take away from the time component. And if I want to have more of the time component, I want to be faster, it's going to take away from some of the accuracy, because there's a finite amount of those two things as a composite together. However they're divided or combined, there's a finite amount of those two things, and that's the amount of pie you have, and that's how good of a shooter you are. And you need to stop with the ever-losing equation of trading them back and forth, which it's not that doesn't exist, but that kind of relates more to manner of appropriate application for a given circumstance, and instead decide that you want to have more pie. So you need to make the pie bigger. You need to make the yin-yang symbol bigger is what you need to do to get better, and then you have more of those things. And so the point was to address time and accuracy separately, as if they don't have anything to do with each other. And I think that is an extremely powerful way to make yourself philosophy by which to adhere to make yourself better is really, really good for that. Because then what you do is you go, well, how long does it take me to draw the gun? Okay, so if I can draw the gun in a certain amount of time, like just draw the gun from react to the beep to sights are on target, never mind the difficulty of the shot, just I have got the gun mounted into its final position in whatever that time is. Say it's 1 second, whatever the time is. Let's say it's 1 second. So then that's how fast you can fire your most accurate shot, is what that means. Because the other part of this is you're going to bring the gun to a specific point in space, right? Right spot, wrong spot, miss, hit, Charlie, Delta, perfect Alpha. Those are all a specific point in space, right? So endeavor to bring the gun to the correct point in space. And if you do that, that's a qualitative difference. What about that means it has to take more time? And the answer is there's nothing about that means it has to take more time. You can draw and shoot the center of the upper A at 25 yards or 50 yards or 100 yards just as fast as you can do it at 3 yards, or however fast you can get the gun from in the holster to fully mounted and firing the shot. And the thing that is very difficult about that is bringing the gun to the right spot. And now as I posit these higher and higher target difficulties, that's a really small spot. But if you bring it to the wrong spot, you didn't bring it to any smaller of a spot, did you? Or any bigger of a spot, did you? You didn't. You brought it to a spot. So you make it the right spot, you train to make it the right spot, and you move your hands as fast as you can while you do that, and you run the trigger straight back, and the 3 parts to pressing the trigger better are isolated trigger finger as straight back as possible, continuous increase in pressure, and if you do all the qualitative things right, then you can just fire your most accurate shot in the speed that you can move your hands and move the gun. And the speed that you can move your hands kind of defines the speed that you can move the gun. So if this kind of makes sense as like a kind of a stream of consciousness answer, I hope.
That is gold.
Yeah, for
Like,
those that
everybody
don't know, welcome to Gabe White.
But that is gold. If you could figure that out, like that's everything. And this is a concept that I've toyed with for years now, partially with Gabe, partially with others, and that is it. I dropped this in our private chat. There is no necessary trade-off between speed and accuracy. And the first place I heard that sentence was from Bruce Gray. And what Gabe just said there is exactly how and why that is true, and how you get there.
Yeah, and I specifically like to frame it like with the draw, because I mean, now for the last couple of years, the world's on this run uphill to get like 1 second or below. Great, cool. I like it. I am on that train. But they think about, like, they never put those two pieces together. It's like, well, I can throw the gun out there in an 85, but I'm never getting where I want. So they never connect that dot that you can literally put the gun exactly where you want it if you try to put it exactly where you want it.
And the smaller you make that spot, the more sensitive that process is. So, there's kind of like, so what I've been stating is hugely hypothetical philosophy. And I think it's extremely useful, but, you can definitely measure out that, it's more sensitive. It goes wrong more of the time, the tighter it is, but that's where the skill level comes in, right? I mean, like the better you are, the more you're able to contend with that stuff. That's what is being better.
That was absolute gold, man.
That's it. That's the secret.
Hey, whatever you want to say for the next however long, I'm here for. Let's just do that. That is I want to dig into the class a little bit more, and talk to us a little bit about what the first part of that class looks like from the student's perspective. What are you really getting into, and I guess how fast do you hit the ground running?
It feels like a slow start, and then as soon as you go, you're like dropped off at the speed of light. So like in some classes, you kind of like walk, jog, run, and there's like this like prep period in the beginning where like this all sorts, getting framed out for you, and then you're going. It's wild. It's a really, really intense class. People are like, oh, it's a lot of shooting. It's like the shooting isn't actually the intense part. It's this. There's just so much going on in your head to do the things that you need to do and to pay attention to the things that you need to pay attention to, that as soon as you hit the range, it's just like.
How hard is mindfulness? I mean, like that's what I feel like the point is that you're making there when you tap your head at like, this is the hard part. I mean, and I think you're right. I mean, to me sorry, not to jump in the middle of your answer, but I mean, that to me feels like that's the thing right there is like, it is very hard to be mindful of oneself in all the different ways we can slice that. It is hard.
Yep. And if you show up to like the first half of day one, you'll be like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And what is this all about? And why am I listening to all of this? But like, you got to have faith, because you need every single bit of that morning in order to have success for the next day and a half.
Gabe, I think it was after Chris's episode, it was with one of our guests, and we were talking about the regional level training that you do, or the local level training that you do, and how awesome it would be to be in your neck of the woods, to be able to show up and receive that training at the local level, because it sounds like you do a whole lot of the what you do in your national course, but at a local level with. Is it this? What I want to get to is it the same type of student that you're seeing in your regional training as you are at the national level?
No, definitely not. So I work for a sheriff's office in Oregon. My class, Pistol Shooting Solutions, is not associated with that sheriff's office. I'm also not a deputy. I'm a real odd duck in the LE world, in that I am a full-time, I don't do firearms instruction 100% of my working hours, but I'm a firearms instructor employed by a law enforcement agency to train the private citizens in a full boat of defensive handgun use when they come to us for that, is essentially what it amounts to. So that's a pretty unusual situation. And the program is not mine exclusively. I have rewritten it into the current form that it has, but it was already written before I got to it, and the people that it came from, or at least one person in particular, has such a background and body of real world experience professionally that I have very carefully avoided simply rewriting the program because now it's mine or I'm in charge of it or whatever, and I can, so I've kept it in place. And so it's been an interesting comportment between what there was and the thoughts and concepts that I currently have, and I've got to kind of make the program work for my brain so I can teach it out of my brain. And so there's some amount of kind of turning it into my thing that's gone on, but I've really not just completely changed it arbitrarily because it's time or anything like that. So it is what we would kind of recognize as a solid quality defensive handgun training program for foundational level students. So the numerical standards in that program are challenging for people when they're on their way up for the first time. We would all in the enthusiast world look at them and go, that's it? Like, this is the thing Gabe's doing. I would have thought this would be better. It's really a matter of there being kind of a middle ground between people who are brand new, and it is all very challenging for them. I remember, there was there was one of the classes there I had to stay after class to make the school standard on some things. So when you're coming up through it, it's not easy. But we all, where we are at, would look at it and go like, oh, that's it. But it's so anyway, it's the people that come to that program are definitely not the same as the people that come to the class at the national level. The people at the national level are enthusiasts who have generally, so the most succinct way to explain the people who come to Pistol Shooting Solutions is they're tactical Timmies who don't hate timers and don't deny the existence of time. And if you're that person, you might have a good time at my class. At the regional and local level, it is people who are new to firearms training, and they are like, literally the proverbial Joe and Susie soccer dad who are like, oh, I got a gun because I'm worried about the state of the world. I should be responsible and get some kind of training. Where do I go? The cops. I know. I'll go there. And, so that's why they come to that school. But I take a lot of pride and pleasure in planting a lot of seeds of the bigger world in them as they progress. There's like, I feel like, or I try certainly to do a good job in not letting them come out of our training program with some of the dumb ideas that people can sometimes come out of a tactical pistol shooting program with, which you can come out of those with some bad ideas. Try to not let them do that.
Well, I ran into one of your foundational students in the wild at my first ECQC.
Oh, yeah, I think I know who you mean even, yeah.
If you think about that, coming out of a foundational pistol class at a local sheriff's office, and I believe it was one of his first big training classes out of there, is extreme close quarters concepts.
Yeah.
I'd say you set him up for pretty good success.
Good. I hope so. I really hope so.
They did fantastic in that class.
Yeah. Good. Excellent.
Do you find one group or the other to be more challenging? Andy and I, Andy and I have been working together for years now. But one of the things that that I ran into when once he got that training junkie bug and he would go and take a couple classes, he would want to bring it back. And it was like, there's a very distinct difference between the new shooter that is our primary student base and the students that national level trainers are teaching for the most part, right? And that's why, we have this term of gateway instructor. And it's funny that you're a gateway instructor to yourself. If you think about it, right? Like you're the gateway instructor to set people up that maybe go be ready to train with you. And
Actually, it's kind of funny that question has it just mostly in this last year. It's funny that old saying of like you're not famous until you go, whatever 100 miles away from where you live. That I've definitely over time seen that to be true. My own area is like the last place that I've gotten set up to have pistol shooting solutions, and I've actually been fielding that question a whole bunch of times just this fall. It's finally come to be that I've got enough of my foundational people from the local area that are aware of the national class that they're saying, "Am I ready for this national class?" And there's a little bit of a gap between the end of our training program and where I kind of envision people to be at the beginning of pistol shooting solutions. It's not the worst gap. Like people, like a good grad from our program could go into PSS, but there is a little bit of a gap there. So it's kind of a funny question I've been fielding.
Man, that's awesome. Yeah, I battled with Andy. So I'm like, man, that's great. And then we had an instructor out with us on the range and just observing us. And after that, he was like, man, I don't know how you do it. And it's like, yeah, you're dealing with a lot of safety stuff, right? That's where a lot of students can be unsafe. When I show up and I take a class with Tim Herron or Tom Gibbons, I would be surprised if there's a major safety violation, right? Like a lot of those students are squared in and dialed in. What do you, Annette, what was your biggest challenge this last time you took it?
Shooting a really difficult to shoot gun for the class. So like there was no room for error in paying attention to the things I needed to pay attention to and doing the things I needed to do. Like everything just had to be spot on perfect. And with a gun that was ripping out my hands.
You had a lot of tape.
And that gun, like I had conversations during the weekend and after on the problems with running that gun through very high volume shooting and very high performance shooting. This is the Beretta 80X that I have a T&E from Beretta on. And like the stock sights are frankly trash for what we want to be doing. They are absolutely fantastic for normal everyday concealed carry. They will get the job done. But when you're trying to like hit turbo standards or light pin standards, everything has to be perfect. Like every single thing that you pay attention to, you can't have any slop on what you're seeing in the sights. You can't have any slop on how you're running the trigger. You just have to do everything exactly right. I think it's actually a really good learning experience for me. And I'm looking forward to doing this.
That seems to be kind of the answer with. That's not the smaller gun, but it's kind of a smaller gun. And, it seems to be kind of the answer with smaller guns is like you can, especially today, there's some pretty capable smaller guns and you can run them alongside the big ones, but wow, they are less forgiving. They're just so much less forgiving. I mean, that's been my experience a little bit that I mess around with my G43s is that, I mean, I can pretty much do the same thing with them as I can with a 17, but oh, wow, I can screw it up so much easier, so much faster.
If it tanks, it tanks for real.
Yes, exactly.
So I have a question for you on that same kind of line of thought. So in your third PSS, you were running a more difficult to run gun. Yes, I'm So what was the duration of time from your first pistol shooting solutions till the third? And did you run the harder to run gun better than you would run in the first one as you developed? Do you understand how I'm framing that question?
So I took my first PSS in 2018, which seems a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Man,
it really feels like it. Good grief.
Wow. I've like lived an entire life between that
Shooter years are like dog years, right?
Today. So I actually stepped away from a lot of the shooting I was doing in that period between 2018 and now. Like there's been years in there where like Gabe's class might have been one of 2 shooting specific classes I'd taken all year. And what's been super interesting to me has been how much of that skill sustains over time once you hit a certain level. Like when I show up and fire my first shots at PSS, like they're probably going to be a little ugly and everything. But over the years, what's gotten better is they're a little ugly, but they're like a better ugly. They're not my best performance, but it's like that gap, right? Between my top level performance and my show up cold with a gun I've barely shot performance is just getting closer and closer and closer. So that's been probably the biggest thing in the last 5 years, because I haven't, to be honest, been working hard on my shooting in that period.
I want to talk a little bit more about gear. Gabe, a lot of folks talk about the Rogers Shooting School and that drill and that skill set. And I believe you were one of the first to run it, or if not the first to run it from concealment and shoot it clean. Is that?
Yeah, I'm the first person to shoot it clean from concealment. And I'm tied with Manny Bragg to be the third to clean it at all.
Are you seeing more? I'm seeing it. I'm sure you're seeing it, right? So I kind of want to get your perspective on this. More and more students showing up to your course trying to earn a pin with running their carry gear.
Yeah, but I've always seen a lot of that, and I think that that's just the the kind of personal attraction of you're gonna get more people who are into it from the same angle that you are. So I have a real big tent philosophy about the class. If the gear is safe and logistically feasible for high volume reps on the range, then I'm good with it, and I don't care if it's unconcealed open top range gear, duty gear, competition gear, or the thing that I care about the most, carry gear from concealment. I really don't care, as long as it's with safe and logistically feasible for the range. Then any of those are fine by me. But because that last thing, the carry gear from concealment, is my own personal thrust and the way I shoot everything all the time, then I get more of those people. So it definitely. I definitely do have the overwhelming majority is running from that same kind of setup like I am. And it's generally a performance-oriented setup, wherever that person's at, whatever they see it to be at that time, whether it's strong side or appendix, but hugely, slanted toward appendix and some kind of performance-oriented gun that somebody entertains that they can carry concealed, whether it's kind of like a juiced-up mid-size gun or a juiced-up full-size gun, or some amount of people are running real close to stock guns, though that definitely seems to be, we're in a time of some pretty juiced-up guns for sure. So, yeah.
No, that's a dumb question. So. So you carry a Glock 30. Are you still carrying the Glock 34?
I'm carrying a 17, actually. I've been carrying a 17 so I carried the 34 from about 2010, 2011 until the Gen 5 came out in, I think, December 2017, and I just needed to change a little something. I needed a little something to be different, and going to a different generation of full-size Glock was about the size of change I wanted. So we're talking a real small change, but just a little bit of change to kind of refocus my attention. And so I went to the Gen 5s as soon as they came out, which was an uncharacteristic by me early adoption thing, but I wanted to, so I did. And at the time, the 34s weren't out yet, so I just grabbed the 17s because they were. And I had shot and loved the 17s for a long time before the 34s. So it was kind of it's very hard for me to tell the difference between a 17 and a 34 shooting it. I mean, I can, but it's not easy at all.
Earlier you mentioned that it was an intermediate to advanced level course. Is there a minimum skill set that students need to have before attending the course?
Yes, they should be. So kind of a handful of things. They need to be able to factually, no kidding, execute the 4 firearm safety principles continuously, including while on a firing line and including in drills where there is movement and angles involved. They need to be able to do that. They need to be able to safely draw and holster the gun. They don't have to be real great at it, but they do need to be safe at it. And it should not be the first class that they are drawing from the holster. It absolutely should not be that. It shouldn't be their first class anyway. People need to be able to act in accordance with the customs of live fire range training activity, like we all kind of know and are used to. They need to. They probably should not be their first experience doing that. So depending on the person, they ought to have between 2 days and 10 days of defensive firearms skills training live on the range. Somewhere in that span. Totally depends on the person and the school they went to. But, if somebody was really apt and really took to it well, after literally a couple of days of training, I think they could get into PSS and benefit from it. That'd be at the way apt end. And maybe some people, they really ought to be at it 2 or 3 weeks worth of training before they get into PSS. It's kind of varies. And then accuracy wise, the number that I put on that is if somebody can hit a 6x6 head box on demand at 10 yards without pressure repeatedly, without missing it, then I think we can get started with them in PSS. Now, the more shooting ability you have, the better. The more drawing and shooting ability you have, the better. And the better you start with those things, the easier the class is generally going to be. And it's got enough, my feeling is it's got enough layers in it that generally you want to be in as good stead as you can, but it's also kind of one of those things that's got enough depth of replay value that I wouldn't address it the way that people sometimes address USPSA, where they don't want to go to it until they have gotten good enough that they can just handle it. It doesn't work that way. You're not going to just handle USPSA. It's way too difficult for that. So what you do is you get to where you can safely participate in it, and then you do that, and that's how you learn to handle it, is in the course of actual participation in it. It's kind of like same thing but smaller. I think there's enough depth of difficulty and depth of replay value, at least from the standpoint of the raw technical skills themselves, that somebody isn't going to just get to, highly unlikely somebody's going to get to where they're just going to own that stuff and totally handle it. And sometimes people do, but that's a real rarity. I mean, for the most part, just get good enough to do it and then go do it. And hopefully that helps you get better at doing it.
One of the first times that I kind of happened across any of your content, it was a video of you on the move shooting a bowling pin, and effortlessly. It just looked absolutely effortless. And so that was very intriguing. And one of the other things that stood out is, I guess, a topic that's starting to, I feel like, gain a little bit more popularity and mainstream attention is vision. And I think you were one of the first folks that talked about, shifting your focal plane, and I'm going to butcher that entire topic, but, towards the end of the episode here, can you talk to us a little bit more about the work that you did and some of those leaps that you experienced with your vision?
Yeah, that's actually another of the major leaps that I would identify for myself. And actually, that's one of the ones that's not really in the class as a major thing. And it's because so many people are shooting dots today. And the thing that I do with my eyes, shooting irons, that makes it better, is not doable by, evidently not doable by everyone. A lot of people can do it. Not everybody's eyes work this way, and it's not relevant to using dots, and an awful lot of people are using dots, so it really doesn't occupy a large place in the class. But basically, I learned to control the depth of focal distance that my eyes have. So when I'm mounting the gun, whether it's coming from the holster or coming from a ready position or coming from a previous target, I shift focal depth back to where the front sight is going to be before it's actually there. And that gets me out from under the classical dilemma of you can either shoot with a front sight focus with more detail in the overall sight picture, which does get you tighter aiming, but that may not be relevant on all the shots, and is definitely not relevant on all the shots, or you can take more time to get that front sight focus and get it sharp and clear and get that detail, but then it's at the cost of time. I think that's the thing I said the first time. Or you can ignore that detail, shoot with blurry sights, but more immediately. But then you don't have that detail, and in modern pistol shooting, we've learned that that's perfectly sufficient aiming in a great many circumstances, but in some it is not. And when it's not, then I'm kind of ahead for time, and I just shoot that way all the time. So basically, unless I screw up, which I certainly do, but if the gun is at full extension, then I have hard, sharp, and clear front sight focus, because my eyes will allow me to do that. And that kind of makes dots less relevant. I've kind of come to see, or come to think, I don't know if I'm right, but I've come to think that with my eyes working the way that they do, that I with irons am kind of somewhere in between a normal person with irons and a normal person with a dot, because I get a large amount of detail. I get maximum detail out of the irons. Whatever detail you're going to get out of the irons, I'm getting it all the time. And I think that gets them kind of partway between normal person with dot and normal person with irons. But my eyes have started. This year is the first year of my life I've had to move my hand further from my face in order to see it clearly. So the dot is on the way. I'm going to be going to it. I know I will. I just haven't quite done it yet. But one day I'm going to wake up and all of a sudden irons are going to suck, and then it's going to be time for a dot.
I read Brian Enos's book, like everybody did who does this, and way too early in my shooter development. And it turns out that and I think that's true for everybody, but it turns out that see what you need to see is in fact the answer. It's just trying to define what see what you need to see actually means, because it's so individual, and it's not even just like biological, like how your eyes operate, but like how your brain processes what you see and decides what to do about it.
No, I know. I agree. It is right. It is. It's just that I guess the trick is, you've been in my class. I love and hate that answer, because it is true. It is definitely true. What I hate about it is it's mechanically useless and devoid of any actual any workman-like answer, where it's like, okay, you're in this position, they're in that position. You can get to this other position, and step 1 is you put your arm here, and step 2 is you put your foot here, and step 3 is you're going to do this, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to change the position. And those things I love, and empty answers I hate. And so remember when we were like, whatever it was, half an hour ago, and I had that epic answer of the divorcing the accuracy from time and throwing off the yoke of low expectations. That is exactly the kind of mechanical specificity that I would really prefer to have in training, instead of a concept devoid of any of the mechanics. And you can just go on your journey, and hopefully you'll happen upon those mechanics in your journey. Instead, it could be like, okay, look, when you want to pull the trigger, you're going to bring the gun, you move your hands as fast as you can, you bring your gun to this spot, try to make it the right spot instead of the wrong spot, and then we're going to run the trigger straight back. And when you run the trigger straight back, there are 3 parts to doing it straight back, and these are those parts. That's the kind of answer I like, and I don't like the kind of answer that is see what you need to see, where it's like go in the desert and hopefully you're going to find the answers.
Just stand up. Don't go to the ground.
Yeah. That. That's like that.
Up. Just stand up. That's all you need to do in a fight. Just stand up. Just see what you need to see. You're fine.
Yes. That's right.
It's easy to hide behind those statements as an instructor, though, right? Because that gives you a very easy out of, you didn't learn anything because you didn't learn what you needed to learn. And it's like, well, hey, no, I didn't learn how to use my sights or press the trigger or grip the gun because you didn't teach me that, right? Like, that's not, so it's, man, this is super exciting, because that's, I told Andy, and I've talked about it on the podcast before, man, it's like, if an instructor doesn't have standards, they probably don't know how to teach. And to hear you talk and really just preach this has been, I don't want to say preach, that sounds terrible, right? It's freaking awesome. And I'm kicking myself for not having already taken your class, but I'm also like, shit, man, I'm nowhere near ready to, because I want to be able to show up and gain the maximum amount of knowledge and skills from the 2-day course. And I don't think as a student, right? I think a student needs to show up and be ready to receive the information that they're paying the guy to receive. Sorry, I'm sorry. I know you're like in the middle of formulating a question, but there's like, you're like making me have to say something here. So one, I think that the whole thing is hard enough, even with specific mechanical answers. It's still going to be plenty hard, and there's still going to be so much to have to refine that's okay. It is okay to not show up feeling like you are ready to receive the knowledge, because even with the mechanical answers, it's still very hard, and it still is not
an answer that we're ultimately seeking. There's like a bunch of good answers. There's a bunch of good answers out there. You could go to a number of different people and get an answer, get a set of answers that, if faithfully followed, and you navigate the path well for yourself, can take you to like the highest levels. It's already hard enough that it's already going to be that way, even with mechanical answers. So it just seems like totally pointless to me to try to proceed without the mechanical answers and trying to reinvent the wheel. And then the other, kind of like half an answer along with that, from my mind, is people get it's back to my enormous gratification. People evidently seem to find replay value at different levels in training, and so like it's back to that saying, I don't even know. This is something that my dad said, and it probably came from some very annoying place, but when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And I have seen that happen many times in PSS, that when somebody takes it the first time, there's a certain set of stuff that they get out of it. And then they kind of like get some of that stuff built into their game and trained in accordance with, and then the next time they come, there's kind of like a different set of answers that they get out of it. So I don't know that you need to really worry about that. Like, there'll be a set of answers, and then if you did it again another 2 years later, it's possible that there's a different set of answers, maybe.
Yeah. Can I hop in on this one for a second? Because I have a particular thought about this. And Gabe, tell me if you agree, but I think people get the testing and the learning confused. So they kind of, I'm not ready for the testing. Well, that's why you've tiered the testing.
Yeah.
And they think that, well, it's proof. No, it's a metric. So now you know where to build, right? So that's where I think, because I've heard that too from people. I'm not ready for Gabe's class. I'm like, well, you can get your gun out. You can put it away.
Yeah.
You can shoot. There's something to be learned. As long as you're safe, there's something to be learned there. But I tend to agree with you. Like, not for the guy that picked up his gun yesterday. It might be a little much.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly correct, Chris. It is the testing is in there, and it's it's a significant layer. I mean, it's not like it's an insignificant layer, but it is one layer of many layers in that class, and it is that class is very, very, very much intended to be, and I think it is, and I really hope that it is, functioning on multiple levels kind of continuously. There's kind of a lot of stuff going on at any given time, and it kind of bounces in between the technical to the tactical to the personal regime of performance stuff, and trying to get somewhere tighter and better with all of them. But yeah, man, I definitely agree with you there, Chris. Definitely do.
One of the things I've noticed too is when you talk about you get what you need to get out of the class. I was fortunate. I kind of came in as a relatively high level shooter from a technical perspective. And I remember really distinctly the second time I took your class, I just had a lot going on in my life, in my shooting life, in my personal life, everything else. And it took everything I had to pull out the performance I did. I think I did 4 light pin runs on day 2 because day 1 was trash for me. And day 2, we just like put it together and made it work. And there's something about the way the class is structured that gave me the ability to go, oh, this is what I need to do in order to get to where I need to get to under these conditions. It was the same class, more or less. Right? Like It wasn't that much change in the curriculum or anything. It was just, oh, this is what I need to learn this year. This year I need to learn, I can put it all together. Versus, this third time I took it is what I needed to learn was how hard is it to shoot those little guns? And what and what changes about that? And there's stuff I got out of the class and the way in which you approach things that helped me figure that out.
Cool.
But I'm still going to take the class with a normal carry gun.
Yeah, I'm going to show up with my Glock 48. That's my my challenge. And then if I suck, I just blame it on the gear, right? That's what we do.
You're not supposed to do that.
Well, that's
not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to look at, so like think of whoever it is that you think of as like the highest Glock shooter in all of creation. And if that's Dave Savigny or whomever, it doesn't matter. So think of whoever you think of as like the highest Glock shooter in all of creation, and then you go, okay, so they're doing with that Glock. So then that should define what you could be able to do with the 48, and all that remains is for you to do much work for you to be able to do that, or work according to your level of motivation, and then you will get proportionately close to doing that.
Well, that was the perfect answer. All that's left is to do much work.
Do much work.
Full stop.
I know we're right at the hour mark. Before we get off, and feel free, we can. I'd be more than happy to share a link in the videos. I'm sure you get this question asked a ton, and you might be tired of beating this horse. Let's talk about the pins.
Sure.
What are the standards, and I guess the success rate if you track that?
So I guess the first thing to say is although I am not the person who has to go around the world saying it's a magazine, not a clip, it's a magazine, not a clip, it's a magazine, not a clip, they're goals, not standards. So the internet likes to call them standards because that's the word that we use in our subculture for talking about tests and the levels of threshold demanded by those tests, whether they're obligated or not obligated. But they're not obligated. They're goals for enthusiasts. They're not a professionally or morally obligated level of performance that if you can't do it, you're wrong and you need to go fix yourself, and then maybe we won't not like you anymore or something, the rest of the enthusiasts. So they're goals, not standards, number one. Number two, to make it's only, if you see the amount of writing I do on the score sheets to record and calculate the scores, it's really stupid, and it's like, it should definitely not be more complicated. A good argument could be made that it should be a lot less complicated because there's already enough that I'm writing down. So to take you through the most succinct chain of the scores that I could, the lower of the 3 pins is the dark pin, and that's what I would lovingly call a tactical level of proficiency at a core skill of drawing and shooting a handgun at a single thread at 7 yards. And there are several different tests within that, but for failure to stop, one that's very, very commonly known, 2 body, 1 head, drawn from the holster at 7 yards, and this is working with a USPSA target with or the USPSA A zone in the body, and then a 4-inch circle in the head. Most typically is the target that we're using. 2.9 seconds final net score. So if you shot it clean, that's drawing and shooting it in 2.9 seconds. If you were not concealed, you get a 1/4 second bonus or subtraction if you are shooting it from concealment. So you could shoot it clean in 3.15, and that would get you dark pin threshold run. The light pin is what I would call an early stage of excellence at the core skill of drawing and shooting a handgun at a single thread at 7 yards. I see a lot of really high level professionals shooting in somewhere in the light pin category, usually from a combination of high accuracy, high accountability, and moderate speed is usually how that comes about. But that definitely is where they tend to shoot. And I've seen B through M class shooters win and fail to win the light pin. So there's another kind of reference in there. The failure to stop score, final net score for light pin is 2.25 seconds. That's a 125 draw, 25 split, 75 transition up to the head. So 225 final net score, or if you shot it from concealment, then you could have 250. And then turbo is 1.7 seconds final net score. So that breaks down to a 1 second draw, 0.2 split, 0.5 transition up to the head. And you got a 1/4 second bonus over that if you were shooting it from concealment. So you could shoot it in 195 clean and you'd be same spot. That'd be the minimal turbo threshold. And I've seen master and grandmaster level shooters win and fail to win the turbo pin, somewhere in that ballpark. So it kind of very, very, very roughly equates to something like that. And I've seen, I already said that, master and grandmaster level shooters win it and fail to win it. Yeah, that's it. So, and that threshold, the turbo threshold on that, the 1.7 seconds was kind of directly extrapolated off of one of the very most useful thing. I guess it kind of ties it all together. One of the very most useful things I ever did for myself in shooting many years ago was I looked up the scores on the old IDPA classifier of Dave Savigny, Robert Vogel, and Ben Steger, and I filled out score sheets with their names and their scores on them, and I laid it there next to my score sheet, and I look at that and I go, okay, I'm here and they are there. How do I get from here to there? And that doesn't tell you how to get from here to there, but getting from here to there is a whole lot easier if you, 1, know where here is, 2, know where there is, and 3, know that you want to get from here to there. Then it's a lot easier to get from here to there if you know those 3 things at least. And so the old IDPA classifier, the first 3 strings were failure to stop, 2 body, 1 head, and they had a little bit bigger head target. They had a 6x6 head box instead of a 4-inch circle, which is 12 square inches versus 36 square inches. So there definitely is a difference there. And if I remember correctly, their scores averaged out to 1.58 seconds. So there had to be a little bit in there for that smaller head circle. So we went with 1.7, and that also breaks down to a nice formulaic 1 second draw, 0.2 split, 0.5 transition up to the head. So we went with that. So those are the kind of performance levels that we're working with in PSS, at least as far as the pins go. And, like I said, goals, not standards. Not getting a pin is normal and doesn't make me think anything bad about anybody or their ability to defend themselves. It's difficult goals intended to motivate enthusiasts, and I've definitely a lot of my own skill has come from having difficult goals that were intended to motivate me and did exactly that, and then I worked real hard to reach or exceed them, and I've profited enormously from it. So want to give other people the same opportunity, basically.
It's all about throwing off that yoke of low expectations. Expect more.
Yeah.
That was beautifully said. I know we're right at the end of the hour here for you folks. I want to give you the rest of the evening back. Before we do that, Gabe, I'm going to ask you the laziest question of the show, but it is something that I do want to get out there. Is there anything that we should have talked about or discussed with regards to the course that we didn't get into?
No, I don't think so with regard to the course, no.
And then, Chris, let me kick it over to you. Anything that you want to, any final thoughts for you?
I just want to say, I appreciate any opportunity I get to talk to Gabe. So it was nice to have the opportunity. I haven't seen him in a while. I used to live in his neck of the woods, so it was significantly easier then than it would be now.
Yeah, it was cool to see you, Chris. I definitely haven't seen you in a while. I know it's really nice to see you, man.
And Annette, we'll kick it back over to you for your final thoughts.
Gabe is one of my favorite shooting nerds to spend time with, so it was nice to get a little bonus this year.
You too, Annette. I really appreciate it. It is always a real pleasure and honor anytime you're in my class. So I really value our friendship and your attendance to my class too. Both.
Happy to be there. Oh, and I'm going to plug this because Gabe probably isn't. You should totally listen to his house music. It's even better than his shooting.
Oh, wow. I haven't been told anything like that ever. That's crazy.
It's really good.
Find the said house music.
Well, so in addition to shooting, I also produce tech house music. So that's a certain of the many subgenres of electronic dance music. So if you like to listen to, high energy, like it's for the filthy warehouse party at the middle of the night at the peak time, fun songs, then you should look it up. It is very, very fun and slightly naughty, not very much by today, certainly not by today's standards, but I always feel compelled to give that like very slightly not safe for work thing, because there's a lot of stuff about like butts and cats and lasers and boobies or whatever. So things that are fun and at parties. So that's really fun. So you should definitely check that out. And in order to check it out, you can find it on any number of the streaming platforms. You got to look up the name Leopard Step. That is my producer name. So look up Leopard Step. You can find, I got like 25 tracks out, man. It's awesome.
That is so freaking awesome. And thank you so much for sharing that. That is,
yeah, thank you.
I hope people start showing up to your class playing this, man. That's going to be, that is great thing. But I had no idea. That's cool, man. That's, Hey guys, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight and for carrying the episode. Chris, thank you so much for jumping on here last minute. Annette and Gabe, you guys were awesome. I appreciate the conversation and the depth of knowledge that you shared this evening. For our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Y'all stay safe, and we'll see you next week.